Before we speak of freedom, we must speak of slavery, because most people who consider themselves free are, in fact, shackled, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, by forces they neither recognize nor resist. These aren't chains made of iron, but of distraction, the soft chains, the seductive ones, the kinds that smile as they bind you. You check your phone before you even get out of bed. You open an app while standing in line. You scroll when you're supposed to be listening. You watch one more video, though you already feel guilty. Then you tell yourself, just this one, then another, and another, until the silence is gone. Until your mind, which once held ambition, stillness, and dignity, becomes a hallway for other people's noise. The Stoics had a name for this: internal slavery. Epictetus warned us that the man who cannot govern his own attention is no better than a drunkard who staggers with every push. The ancients saw what we pretend not to see, that the first battle in any life worth living is the battle for sovereignty over the self. You see, to become indistractable is not merely a matter of tactics. It's not about deleting apps or turning off notifications. It's a philosophical stance. It's a declaration that you refuse to be ruled by whatever stimulus happens to be loudest. It's a return to yourself. To become indistractable is to say, I am not a leaf blown by the winds of novelty, I am the tree. But let's start at the root. Why do you get distracted in the first place? Not because the world is noisy. The world has always been noisy. The real reason is because distraction serves a deeper purpose: escape. Distraction is not just a failure of discipline, it's a shield against discomfort. When we are unwilling to feel bored, anxious, uncertain, or dissatisfied, we reach for something shiny to dull the edge. The scroll, the snack, the tab, the feed. This is why any attempt to cut out distractions without cutting into why you seek them is doomed to fail. The Stoics understood this intimately. They believed in exposing the mind's delusions, stripping them bare. Seneca wrote that, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality, and this includes the suffering we imagine we'll feel if we simply sit with ourselves for a while." But you must learn to sit in that silence if you wish to build inner strength. No one trains for war by running from discomfort. So the first Stoic principle in becoming indistractable is voluntary discomfort. Choose boredom. Choose silence. Choose to delay gratification when every nerve in your body screams for it. Not because this is punishment, but because it is training. It is how a soldier of the soul is made. Picture this: Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, seated in his tent. Outside, battles rage. Inside, scrolls lie open, thoughts form, and distractions, though abundant, are dismissed like insects. His journal, what we now call meditations, is filled not with triumphs of war, but battles of the self. His notes to himself echo across time. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. In modern terms, we have surrendered that power. We outsource our attention to corporations. We allow our focus to be auctioned off, our days to be dissected into fragments. We treat the present moment as something to escape, rather than something to live in. But what if you reclaimed it? What if your attention, your most sacred possession, belonged only to you again? This is the heart of Stoicism, to become whole. And to be whole, you must be undivided. And to be undivided, you must become indistractable, not just in practice, but in principle. Let me ask you now, when was the last time you were fully present? Not on your phone, but truly alive in the moment? When the breath entering your lungs was enough? When your thoughts were calm, unhurried, directed? When you acted from intention, not reaction? That's the state we're after. That's where the Stoic lives. Not in retreat from the world, but rooted in it. He may still use tools, devices, calendars, but they serve him, not the other way around. He doesn't avoid distraction because it's a productivity hack. He avoids it because it fragments the soul. So, in this first part of our journey, understand this: distraction is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It shows you what you fear. It reveals your discomforts. It unveils your dependencies. And in doing so, it gives you the map to your own freedom. if you're brave enough to follow it. Becoming indistractable is not about doing more. It's about being more conscious, more deliberate, more silent when silence is called for, more fierce when discipline is demanded. And that journey starts not with your phone, but with your philosophy. The next time you're tempted to check something meaningless, pause, not to judge yourself, but to ask, what am I really trying to avoid right now? That is the moment the Stoic wakes up, and you too can wake up. Because freedom, true freedom, does not begin with the absence of distractions. It begins with the presence of self. There's a powerful image that Marcus Aurelius invokes in Meditations, an inner citadel, a fortress within your soul that no external force can breach. This wasn't a metaphor for mere emotional distance, it was a living philosophy. He believed that while your body can be wounded and your possessions stripped away, your attention, your will, your reason, your clarity must remain within your command. Now pause for a moment and consider your own life. Have you built that citadel? Or have you outsourced its walls to algorithms and applause? To be indistractable, you must first understand that every time your mind is pulled by something external, whether it's a notification, a drama, or a fear, it's not just a moment lost. It's a surrender of the throne. And the more often you abdicate that throne, the more your soul becomes a public marketplace, open to anyone with a clever hook or emotional bait. The Stoic doesn't live like that. He rises in the morning not to be dragged by the day, but to meet it. He clears his mind the way a warrior sharpens his sword, because dull attention is vulnerable attention. He does not hope for focus. He prepares for it. So let us talk now of rituals, because willpower alone cannot save you. Even Epictetus, who lived in poverty and walked among slaves and emperors, understood this. The mind must be shaped daily, or it drifts into chaos. You cannot casually stroll into sovereignty. You must approach it like a craft, like a sacred duty. Each day, each hour, is a rehearsal for clarity. And clarity, like any virtue, must be forged under pressure. That pressure comes in the form of temptation, not just temptations of pleasure, but of scatteredness. The temptation to check everything, to know everything, to react to everything. And here lies one of the greatest illusions of our age, the belief that staying informed is the same as staying wise. But information is not wisdom, just as noise is not music. So the Stoic chooses what he consumes, not just in food or drink, but in thought. He does not read every opinion. He does not answer every provocation. He does not attend every mental parade passing through his head. He learns to say no to others, yes, but more importantly, to himself. That is the key to building the citadel, discipline of mind. Not harshness, but selectiveness. Not rigidity, but clarity of what deserves space in your soul. Think of your mind as a home. Would you leave the doors open, letting strangers walk in and rearrange your furniture? Then why do you allow uninvited thoughts, notifications, gossip and noise to walk in unfiltered? Marcus wrote, "You don't have to turn this into something. It doesn't have to upset you. This is not detachment for its own sake. It's a reminder that most things do not require your emotional presence. Your attention is your responsibility, and no one can guard it but you. But guarding it does not mean retreating from the world. Stoicism is not isolation. It's participation without pollution. You can engage with the world and still remain whole, but only if you choose your engagements. And true choice requires preparation. Begin each day with a moment of stillness. Do not rush. Do not check. Do not scroll. Sit, breathe, and remember you are not a passenger in your life. You are the pilot. Let your first thought not be about what others are doing, but about what kind of person you wish to be today. The Stoic begins his day with a moral vision. He doesn't wait to be inspired, he decides. He reminds himself, today I will be tempted, I will be interrupted, I will be misunderstood, but none of these can touch the part of me that chooses. This is what it means to build the inner citadel, a mind that holds its shape no matter how many forces try to twist it. Now ask yourself honestly, Where are the breaches in your fortress? Is it your inbox, your endless scrolling, the fear of missing out, the need to respond immediately to every ping? These are not small cracks. These are siege weapons disguised as convenience. And once they penetrate, they do not merely steal your time, they weaken your character. They make you impulsive, reactive, dependent on stimulation. But here's the good news: you don't have to escape the world to fix this. You just need to become selective again. Remember, the Stoic does not hate the world. He simply refuses to be ruled by it. And in our era, that refusal begins with attention. To become indistractable, you must consciously choose what enters your mind, the same way you'd choose what enters your home, your body, or your heart. You must become a guardian of inner peace. That's not romantic fluff. That's practical, philosophical warfare. Because the world is not going to stop throwing distractions at you. In fact, it's getting better at it every day. But the world doesn't need to change for you to become free. Only one thing needs to change: your posture. So here is your task for today. When you feel the pull, whether it's a tab, a buzz, a tweet pause, just pause and say to yourself, this is a test of my citadel. Nothing more, nothing less. Then choose with honor. Every time you do this, you thicken the walls. You reinforce the foundation. You become not perfect, but aware. And awareness is where transformation begins. There's a story told by the Stoics, not in words, but in the way they lived. It says, wherever you are, be entirely there. When you speak, speak with your whole mind. When you eat, taste each bite as if it were your last. When you read, read as if you were drinking from a fountain of wisdom. And when you are alone, let your solitude be complete, not filled with noise, but filled with presence. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you did one thing with your whole attention? In the modern world, we glorify multitasking. We celebrate the person who can juggle 5 windows, 6 chats, and 3 thoughts all at once. But what the Stoics knew, and what modern neuroscience now confirms, is that multitasking is not efficiency. It is fragmentation. It is the rapid switching of attention from one thing to another, which leaves the mind frayed and unfocused. It is a shortcut to mediocrity dressed up as ambition. Epictetus said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Why? Because true improvement requires focus. The person who stops responding instantly, who doesn't know every headline, who isn't in every conversation, they will be seen as slow, distant, even arrogant. But in reality, they are building something others have forgotten how to touch: depth. And depth requires sacrifice. It means saying no to surface-level stimulation. It means abandoning the illusion that you can live many lives at once. It means choosing now again and again over later, over elsewhere, over everything that seeks to scatter your mind. The Stoic does not multitask because his soul is not divided. He understands that a divided mind cannot produce a whole life. He does not write while checking messages. He does not plan while comparing. He does not listen while calculating his reply. He brings his full self to the moment, not because it's trendy, but because it's just. Justice, in Stoic terms, is giving each thing its due. And what does this moment deserve, if not your undivided presence? Consider Marcus Aurelius once more. Though he governed an empire, he often reminded himself to simplify. If you seek tranquility, he wrote, do less. Or more accurately, do what's essential. And do it with intention. That last part is key. The Stoic doesn't merely do less. He does with intention. He chooses not to dilute his soul across 10 tasks. He enters the one that matters. Then, when it's complete, he moves, whole and undiminished, into the next. This is not just discipline. It is respect. For yourself, for your time, for the things you've committed to. When you divide your attention, you don't just betray the task, you betray your own potential. And yet, the modern world will reward you for distraction. It will applaud your multitasking, your instant replies, your availability at all hours. But beneath the surface of all this responsiveness is a man exhausted, a woman scattered, a mind running, not walking. And running minds do not reach wisdom. They only reach exhaustion faster. So here is your Stoic correction. Slow down, not to escape, but to re-enter. When you drink your morning coffee, do only that. When you speak to a friend, close the tabs in your mind. When you read a book, put the phone in another room. These are not acts of productivity. They are acts of resistance, of rebellion against a world that wants you scattered. To become indistractable is to reclaim presence. But presence isn't something you wait for. It's something you build through small, daily refusals. Refuse the urge to check. Refuse the belief that you can do 3 things well at once. Refuse the invitation to live fragmented. These small rejections are not rejections of the world. They are rejections of a way of being that keeps you from yourself. Because who are you really when you are not divided? You are capable of thought that moves mountains. You are capable of love that lands with weight. You are capable of work that echoes beyond your life. But none of that is possible in a state of constant distraction. Your highest self cannot survive the storm of split attention. It needs shelter. It needs silence. It needs space. That is what presence is, space for the soul to breathe. The Stoics were not monks. They lived in cities, in courts, in chaos, and yet they found presence because they chose it not once, but daily. Not for show, but for clarity. So begin today by watching your mind. Notice how quickly it flinches away from boredom. How often it seeks a new tab, a new sound, a new task. And when it does, don't condemn it. Just smile gently and bring it back. Say, not now. I am here. Every time you return to the moment, you are not just practicing focus, you are practicing freedom. Freedom from the compulsion to escape. Freedom from the belief that more is better. Freedom from the lie that divided attention is strength. In truth, the most powerful person in the room is not the one who talks the most, responds the fastest, or appears the busiest. It is the one who is fully present. So let this be your experiment today. Do one thing with your whole self, and then notice how alive you feel when you stop being everywhere and finally arrive here. In our pursuit of focus, we often come to a dangerous misunderstanding, the belief that emotions are distractions. That if only we could be less anxious, less angry, less sad, then we would finally be able to concentrate, to build, to stay present. But this is not what the Stoics believed. Not at all. The Stoics did not seek to destroy emotion. They sought to understand it, to hold it up to the light, to examine its shape, its source, its weight. They believed that emotion, unexamined, becomes tyranny. But emotion, understood, that becomes guidance, clarity, power. Distraction, more often than not, is a symptom, not a disease. You don't scroll endlessly because you're lazy. You do it because you're avoiding something. You don't interrupt your work to check messages because you're weak. You do it because you're uneasy, uncertain, afraid you're missing something more important. But the truth is always the same. The more you try to run from the discomfort, the more it owns you. So let's ask the deeper Stoic question, not how can I avoid distraction, but what am I distracting myself from? Is it loneliness, doubt, a lack of purpose? Is it the pressure of unmet expectations? The fear that what you're doing doesn't matter? These are not small things. They deserve your attention. Not the scattered attention of compulsive habits, but the focused attention of reflection. The Stoic sits with his discomfort. He welcomes it, not because he enjoys suffering, but because he knows that on the other side of discomfort is growth. Just as the body grows stronger by resisting weight, the mind grows clearer by resisting the urge to escape. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." This is not a rejection of emotion. It is a transformation of it. It is the practice of reclaiming your inner authority. So here is your challenge. Stop judging your emotions as enemies. Begin seeing them as signals. The urge to check your phone, it may be a signal that you're anxious about being forgotten. The impulse to overconsume, it may be a signal that you feel emotionally undernourished. The constant need to be busy, perhaps it signals a fear that stillness will reveal something you don't want to face. These are not flaws. These are invitations. And the Stoic answers the invitation not with guilt, but with courage. He says, "Let me feel what I feel. Let me watch it rise. Let me trace its shape. And then let me choose not to react. Because that's where your freedom lies, not in the suppression of your emotions, but in the sovereignty you hold after they arise." Indistractability, then, is not about silencing emotion. It's about hearing it without obeying it, blindly. It's about creating a space between the feeling and the action, a sacred pause in which your reason, your values, and your higher self are given a voice. That space is everything. That space is where the Stoic lives. Imagine now a mind trained to notice the subtle shifts in feeling, to observe the inner tides without being swept away. That's not repression. That's power. And this kind of emotional awareness is not something you stumble into. It is something you practice. Just as a musician trains the ear to detect tone, the Stoic trains the heart to detect false alarms. He asks, is this real or imagined? Is this urgent or manufactured? Does this emotion serve my values or sabotage them? And most of the time, the answer leads him back to stillness. Stillness is not the absence of emotion. It's the mastery of its direction. You can feel deeply and still remain rooted. You can grieve and still remain awake. You can burn with frustration and still choose not to act on it. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. The distracted person is not bad. They're simply overwhelmed by signals they've never been taught to read. So they react. They flinch. They run. But the Stoic pauses. He listens. Then, with deliberation, he acts or he doesn't. But either way, the action is his. So if you truly want to become indistractable, begin here. Notice your inner weather. Before you blame your habits, check your heart. Before you reach for another task, ask yourself what you're running from. This is not comfortable work, but it is honest work. And honesty with yourself is the first virtue of the indistractable mind. You don't need to conquer emotion to master attention. You just need to stop being afraid of it. Every emotion contains a message. Read it. Reflect on it. Then return to the task at hand, not as a person avoiding himself, but as someone who has returned home to himself. The world will continue to be chaotic, that you cannot change. But inside you, there can be a sanctuary, a place where feelings are welcomed, not worshipped, where thoughts are observed, not obeyed, where decisions are made, not surrendered. That sanctuary is not found in silence alone. It's found in the courage to feel fully, and then to focus anyway. And that, more than any trick or tactic, is what it means to become indistractable. Every second you live is a second that burns away, never to return. The Stoics understood this with terrifying clarity. They didn't shy away from the truth of mortality. They wrapped their philosophy around it. Seneca especially warned of the greatest theft a man can suffer, not the loss of money, not the loss of reputation, but the loss of time. And he didn't mean time in abstract. He meant moments. The morning light on your face, the words you didn't really hear because your mind was elsewhere, the task you never completed because you kept shifting between tabs, the soul-to-soul conversation you missed because you were distracted by a screen. These are not small losses. These are your life disappearing in fragments. The modern world does not ask for your whole day. It takes it in microseconds, a notification here, a headline there, a rabbit hole, a scroll. You still believe the day is yours because you're busy. But busyness is not ownership. Busyness is often just the mask distraction wears to look productive. The Stoic doesn't fear death. He fears wasted life. To become indistractable, then, is to treat time as sacred, not in theory, but in ritual, in practice, in the way you approach even the smallest segment of your day. Ask yourself, What would change if you saw your attention as time made visible? What would you do differently if you believed that every moment you gave to distraction was a piece of your soul you would never recover? You cannot control how long you will live, but you can control how vividly you live. And vividness requires attention. It requires the refusal to dilute this moment with a dozen others. The Stoics trained for this, not with calendars but with conscience. They asked, "What is my duty now?" Because duty clarifies. Duty pulls you into focus. When you know what you're here to do, you don't need motivation, you need only to remember. This is the paradox. The more distracted you are, the more lost you become. But the more anchored you are in duty, the more your attention begins to sharpen, not because you're forcing it, but because you're living in alignment. Distraction flourishes in vague ambition, but it dies in the presence of clarity. So clarify what matters, what deserves the flame of your mind. The Stoic answers this with discipline, yes, but also with a kind of reverence. Because to be fully present with something, your work, your thoughts, your family, is not just a habit. It is a kind of spiritual act. To focus is to honor. Honor the time you have. Honor the task before you. Honor the fleeting nature of life by not treating it as disposable. This reverence doesn't mean you become rigid. It means you become awake. You start noticing when you're slipping into the fog. You start catching yourself in the act of betrayal, not to shame yourself, but to return. The distracted man thinks time is cheap. The Stoic knows it is blood. This is why indistractability is not primarily about blocking apps or setting timers. Those are tools. But the foundation is awareness of death. The Stoic practices memento mori, the daily remembrance that he will die, not to be morbid, but to focus. He knows he will not be here forever. So he begins to ask, what is worth my final years, final days, final hours? And if the answer is not this scroll, this impulse, this escape, then he lets it go, not with resentment, but with peace. Because when you align your focus with what matters, you don't feel deprivation. You feel power. You begin to feel your life again, not as something to numb or escape from, but as something that calls you to show up fully. Think about the last time you were truly immersed in something. Do you remember the sense of time falling away? That's not an accident. That's your natural state, undistracted, awake, engaged. The problem isn't that you can't focus. It's that you've been pulled so far from it that you've forgotten what it feels like. Now some exciting news. Our channel now offers a members club. By joining it, you'll unlock exclusive benefits, deeper content dives, and personal insights. Join us on this journey, and let's build a meaningful life together. And I also humbly ask you to leave a comment, as it helps my channel immensely. If you do not know what to comment, just write "better every day" so I know you reached this far. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Also, I've linked some books on Stoicism that helped me become the man I am today and will also help you achieve a Stoic mindset. But the Stoic never forgets. Because he reminds himself daily, he keeps a journal. He reflects in silence. He does the same work with the same dedication even when no one is watching. Because to him, the act is its own reward. So here is your practice today. Treat time as the finite flame it is. When you sit to work, tell yourself, this hour is not mine to waste. When you speak to someone, say inwardly, let me be fully here because I may never speak to them again. When you feel the pull of a meaningless distraction, whisper, my life is too short for this. This isn't drama. This is discipline. Because the cost of distraction is not only what you miss, it's what you become. You become scattered, restless. Not because you lack ambition, but because you never held anything long enough to go deep. But now you can. You can choose depth over drama, focus over flinching, presence over panic. And you do it not for success alone, but for something more sacred, to honor the life you've been given, by not throwing it away in fragments. In a world of endless invitations, notifications, updates, opportunities, dramas, the word no has become more than a boundary. It has become a moral stance, a declaration. a weapon of clarity against the fog of digital seduction. And no one understood this more deeply than the Stoics. They knew to say yes to everything is to say no to yourself. You may not realize it, but every time you accept a distraction, you've accepted a trade. You've sold a sliver of your time, a piece of your focus, sometimes even a chunk of your dignity, for something that usually isn't worth the price. You didn't mean to do it, but you did. And the currency wasn't money. It was attention, the most limited and sacred thing you own. The Stoics remind us that guarding your attention is not selfish, it's righteous. Why? Because without attention, you can't think clearly. Without clear thinking, you can't act justly. And without just action, your life drifts into reaction, regret, and repetition. You become a machine for other people's priorities, all while losing your sense of who you are. Saying no, then, is not rejection. It is remembrance of your deeper values, your higher aims, your need for stillness and sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius said, "If it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it." We can apply the same principle here. If it's not aligned, don't accept it. If it's not essential, don't engage it. But how do you know what's essential? You must ask a question that the distracted rarely stop long enough to consider. What is my life truly about? Not in poetic terms, but in practice. In your actions, your time use, your relationships, your goals. What are you truly building with your days? And does this next yes contribute to that structure, or does it erode it? The Stoic becomes indistractable by becoming selective. He does not run from the world. He simply filters it. He becomes a gatekeeper, not of information, but of his soul. And like all good gatekeepers, he watches what comes in with care. He doesn't open the door just because someone knocks. He evaluates, does this deserve space in my mental temple? Because make no mistake, your mind is a temple. It is a sacred site, not a public square. Letting everything in desecrates its sanctity. Letting the wrong things in makes you forget how sacred it was in the first place. So how do you strengthen your no? You start small. You practice micro-refusals. You delay the click. You ignore the buzz. You pause before saying yes to the next request. You give yourself 5 seconds to breathe before reacting. These are not heroic acts, but they are the beginning of self-reclamation. And every time you do this, you build a muscle, a moral one that says, I do not owe the world my constant attention. I owe it my best self, and that self needs space to emerge. We often think of distractions as things that come from outside, but the most dangerous ones come from within: the compulsive urge to be liked, the fear of missing out, the addiction to validation. These are the forces that make our no soft, our boundaries porous, our will negotiable. The Stoic faces these forces not with contempt, but with truth. He admits them, names them, strains them. He does not pretend he's above them, but he refuses to let them sit at the controls. So here's what the Stoic does. He builds a system, a rhythm. He creates margins in his day. He keeps his mornings sacred. He chooses a few meaningful goals and gives them priority. He reviews his day at night, not with guilt, but with curiosity. He asks, where did I leak? Where did I drift? What did I say yes to that didn't serve my essence? This is not rigidity. This is respect. To say no is to respect your limited time on earth. To say no is to affirm that not every voice deserves your ears, and not every impulse deserves your hand. To say no is to say yes to stillness, to presence, to depth, to the quiet fire of real focus. Even Epictetus, who owned little and lived humbly, knew the weight of no. He reminded his students that freedom was not the ability to do anything, but the ability to choose what not to do. And choosing wisely requires practice. So make it a practice. Every morning, decide in advance what deserves your full presence. Decide what gets your silence. Decide what you will protect with your time and what you will let pass. And then, when the noise arrives, as it always does, you'll already know the answer. You won't flinch. You won't flinch. You'll simply say, calmly, firmly, number. Not today. And that, perhaps more than anything, is what sets the Indistractable apart. Not that they live in a quieter world, but that they no longer allow the world to dictate the terms of their attention. They have become their own gatekeepers, not out of fear, but out of philosophical love for what's worth preserving inside them. Distraction is not a momentary lapse. It is a habit, a reflex, a pattern etched into the mind through repetition. And like any habit, it becomes invisible over time, normal, automatic, defended by excuses. But the Stoic refuses to normalize what makes him weaker. He questions every pattern. He studies his own impulses. He does not accept as human nature what is actually just human neglect. The distracted mind is not a curse. It is a consequence of a life lived without enough examination. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." The Stoics went further. The unexamined life is not truly lived at all. If your attention is not yours, your choices are not yours. If your choices are not yours, then whose life are you actually living? And so the Stoic begins with the smallest unit, the moment, not the year, not the big plan, just this moment, this breath, this sentence, this thought, because the moment is the only battlefield where attention can be won. So here's the truth: attention is a moral muscle. It is strengthened not by reading books about focus, but by returning to the present over and over again, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when it's hard, especially when you least feel like it. Each return is a rep. Each pause before reacting is a rep. Each time you stay with the discomfort instead of fleeing, rep. Each time you resist the pull of cheap stimulation, rep. The muscle grows, not in bulk, but in clarity. This is why Stoicism isn't a weekend retreat. It's not something you dip into when you feel inspired. It's daily practice. It's spiritual weightlifting. Not glamorous, not viral, but steady, silent, solid. Marcus Aurelius did not write meditations to impress anyone. He wrote it to train himself, to sharpen the sword of attention, to redirect his mind toward what matters. And he did this alone, intense, on battlefields, in illness, in doubt. His discipline was not circumstantial. It was devotional. That's the posture you must adopt if you want to become indistractable. Not one of occasional bursts, but of quiet devotion. You show up every day, even when you fail, especially when you fail. And when you do fail, you don't collapse into self-pity. You don't say, "I'm just too weak." You say, "That was one rep I missed. I'll get the next one." Because the point is not perfection. The point is return. To return to your breath, to return to your work, to return to your values, to return to the moment again and again until that return becomes your new nature. This is the Stoic path. Not straight, not clean, but resolute. And here's where many fall off. They think, because it's hard, it must not be working. But the Stoics knew difficulty is not failure. Difficulty is proof of the process. When the mind resists, that is the very signal that growth is possible. The modern person waits for ease before beginning. The Stoic begins because he understands that ease is the result of training, not its prerequisite. So let's make this concrete. Start your day with a decision, not just about what you'll do, but about how you'll do it. Will you check your phone before you've even met your own mind? Or will you greet yourself first, your silence, your breath, your intent? Begin with one act of complete presence. It could be 5 minutes of stillness, a deliberate walk, a single task done without interruption. Make it sacred, not because the task is grand, but because your presence within it is. Then, throughout the day, mark your returns. When your mind wanders and you catch it, do not scold it. Celebrate it. That's awareness flexing its muscle. That's the Stoic rep. The distracted person thinks failure is the moment of wandering. The Stoic knows failure is only when you don't return. So you return, one moment at a time, and over time the returns become easier. The gaps between them shorten. The mind begins to seek stillness, not noise. It begins to crave the depth of single focus. It begins to feel alive, not just entertained. And here's the beautiful irony. When you practice attention like this, you don't just become more productive. You become more human. You listen better. You speak more truthfully. You work with deeper satisfaction. You relate with more presence. Because distraction fragments not just your time, it fragments your being. But attention restores you. It brings your scattered pieces back together. It allows you to live from one center, not 20. It makes you dangerous, not in a violent way, but in the sense that nothing can pull you without your permission. That's power. That's Stoicism lived. Not loud, not flashy, but grounded, focused, calm in the middle of chaos. And here's what few will tell you. It's not about removing all distractions. It's about becoming the kind of person who knows what deserves to be noticed. That's the aim. Not perfect silence, but wise attention. Not sterile minimalism, but selective richness. Not the absence of noise, but the strength to choose your signal. You don't get there all at once. You get there with reps. One moment, one refusal, one deliberate act. Again and again and again, until your attention becomes who you are. There comes a moment in the Stoic journey when silence no longer feels empty, when stillness no longer feels like absence, when focus is no longer a strain but a homecoming. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets. But one day you catch yourself not checking your phone, not flinching, not fleeing, and instead of distraction, you choose depth, intention, stillness. And in that moment, something ancient awakens inside you. This is not just behavioral change. This is identity change. You are no longer someone who reacts. You are someone who responds. No longer someone pulled, you are someone rooted. No longer a leaf, you are the tree. This is what it means to be indistractable. Not that the world has changed, but that you have. You stopped giving yourself away in pieces. You've stopped scattering your attention like seeds on concrete. You've learned to live from the center outward, not the periphery in. Let's be clear, the distractions never stop. The world is not going to become quieter. It will only become more sophisticated at stealing your attention. But that's fine because you've become more sophisticated at keeping it. The Stoics taught us that the only true freedom is inner freedom, the ability to choose your response, to hold your ground, to walk your own path even when the winds howl. That's the freedom of the indistractable soul. And from that freedom flows peace. Not the peace of comfort, but the peace of clarity, of knowing who you are and what you serve. You no longer need to chase every novelty. You no longer need to outrun your feelings. You no longer need to perform for validation, because you've realized nothing the outside world can offer compares to the power of living aligned with your own nature. Nature, the Stoics remind us, is not chaotic. It is ordered, rhythmic, purposeful. And so are you, if you choose to return to yourself. Every time you silence a false urgency, you remember who you are. Every time you complete a task with your full presence, you build self-trust. Every time you resist the pull of reaction, you carve a deeper groove of sovereignty into your soul. This is the long road. It's not sexy. It won't go viral. But it's real. And it will outlast every trend. Because to be indistractable is not to be untouched by the world. It is to move through the world untouched at the core. And that core is where Stoicism lives. A place beyond the reach of praise or blame. A place that does not panic when things fall apart, because it was never built on the outer scaffolding anyway. A place that doesn't need to impress or respond or prove. A place that knows this moment lived well is enough. So here, at the end of this journey, what remains? One truth, one question, and one decision. The truth: your attention is your life. Guard it, shape it, devote it. They simply point and say, there it is. If you want it, walk. So walk, turn off the noise, return to your breath, choose what matters, and become the kind of person who, in a world of compulsive reaction, has learned the sacred art of still presence. Because in the end, the indistractable man is not merely productive, he is dangerously free, and nothing can distract a soul that has made peace with itself. Now, if any part of this message has been helpful to you, leave us your like and comment, helping the algorithm recommend it to someone who needs it at this time. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos. And if you look through the videos we've already uploaded, you're sure to find something to take with you. Have a good day.